being a grandparent of a transgender person can feel very isolating, and that the generational differences can make it difficult, as this is true for many things, not just about gender. Grandparents, and this is historical, grandparents and grandchildren have a large generational divide. But the beautiful thing is that they can also find things in common. Like, I know one grandma, she was afraid that she would lose the connection with her grandchild that they had so close. They loved to bake together, they loved to sew together, and guess what? As her grandchild transitioned to be his full self, to be his authentic self, he still loved to bake, and he still loved to sew with her. And so they were able to maintain their connection beyond gender. And that is just one example of how grandparents can play such a crucial role in family dynamics. And grandparents can be that key that loves and supports their grandchild, like, no matter what they're going through. And that love and understanding can really help their grandchild to flourish, especially in a world right now where there's a lot of separation and confusion, division, and attacks on transgender people. What I realize too is that it's not an easy subject for us to grasp, because we've been taught, both in our cultures and in science even for a long time, that there's two things. There's two sexes, let's use the word, male, female, and that we see that in nature, okay? But that was a very simplified explanation, because truthfully, there's many ways to be a plant or a human, and even plants can be seen as having male and female parts if we use those words to call it that. But gender is not just binary male or female, but is actually a spectrum, and gender itself is made up of three maybe interweaving pieces that can go together. We can talk about body, which I've mentioned, the outer body, but not just the outer body parts. Could be the DNA structure, hormones, and the hormone receptors. All of this can go toward why someone has a certain feeling about their gender. And maybe some of us have not really had to think about that so much because we're not transgender. And so for so long, our bodies and our minds perhaps aligned with what people were telling us about who we should be. And that gets into social gender, like how I present myself, but also how people read that presentation, how I might choose not to present myself if I'm feeling uncomfortable in a situation, and the assumptions that go along with that, and perhaps even whether it's safe or not in a social situation. People may or may not actually let on to their authentic gender. Or also not being taught will also lead to someone kind of feeling maybe there's only a choice of one thing or two things. And it's perhaps the hardest part, the identity part, which is why I have this image of like a self inside the self. And for those of us maybe who are spiritual in nature, maybe we can relate a little bit to this as well, is that we have many layers of ourself, and identity is about this inner deep layer where a person feels most comfortable describing themselves. It makes most sense to them in an inner place, and I guess it's one of the hardest to understand, because I can't really know your inner world or your inner world or yours unless you tell me, no matter how hard I try or how well I think I know a person. It's really about their own inner experience. And if a person doesn't have the words to describe that inner experience, it gets even more difficult to understand. And I think that was very true for my son for a long time. He didn't have the words. And even when we tried to give him the words, I was learning the words, he said, I don't know. Do you think you could be a boy? that has a vagina? I don't know, right? Because these things are very, well, they're unknown unless we've learned about them. They've been perhaps pushed to the side or hidden in our culture, and people have also had to hide, right? Being in the closet. Trans people, perhaps we could say, are about 30 years behind lesbian and gay people as far as visibility, but also acceptance and acknowledgement of their rights. So these three are part of what makes someone's gender. Sexuality is a different part of humanness. And I differentiate because often when I work with grandparents, there's a lot of confusion around this. So this itself could be a whole discussion, right? But in the book, I go much more into it, in both books. And so sexuality is more about attraction, which could be sexual or romantic. There are many ways to be attracted to somebody, but the question is, well, am I attracted to somebody, and how am I attracted to that person? And also, to whom am I attracted? And those are the parts that go into determining someone's sexuality. Now, they do interplay, because example, if two people of the same gender are in a relationship, we might describe that as gay or lesbian, depending, because it's not up to me to give those words, but maybe I know definitions. So I'm giving you the definitions, but perhaps a person wouldn't even use those for their own self. But we could use Amaya, my son. He allows me to use him as an example. Thank you, Amaya. So, and his partner, fiance Shayla. So Amaya is a man. He's a transgender person who's a man, and he's attracted to, well, it changed. It's an interesting, it's interesting because when Amaya and Shayla first got together, Shayla was still identifying as female. So male, female, that would be heterosexual, right? But then the words Shayla started using for themselves changed. And have you heard of the word non-binary? Okay, so non-binary is someone who does not feel they are male nor female. Perhaps they are in between or a combination, or maybe even not that and another gender. And again, that could be like a whole course, really, right? But in just understanding that people feel this way, Shayla said, you know, I really am not a woman. I'm a non-binary person. And so Amaya was not in a heterosexual relationship anymore, even though it's the exact same person. But they couldn't use that term, didn't make sense for them anymore. So Amaya being a man, yes, a transgender man, but a man, and Shayla being a non-binary person, they decided the word queer would work for them. Have you heard the word queer? I mean, we're in San Francisco, right? So queer has become a term that can be either relating to sexuality or gender or all of them. And again, the book does go way more into these pieces, but I'm going to keep working with that. So gender's not a binary. It's could be seen as a continuum or a spectrum. It's not a choice. These are parts of us that are somehow built in. We're still learning about the interplay of the mind, body, and heart and how that all works together. But they are not just biological traits. Example, if a person has a body that is biologically looking like a female outer body or a male, that is not the only piece that makes up gender. And it's not always outwardly obvious. And a lot can be said about sexuality too, the same. It's that it's not a choice. It's not about just being straight or gay. There can be a continuum, a combination, different words that maybe we're not familiar with. And it's not only about relationships and dating history or labels or even sexual attraction. And again, this can be like, this is a lot to start to really digest. And for other people, it makes sense immediately because that is their experience. So I'm not transgender, like I said. I am a cisgender person. Cis is a Latin prefix, same. Trans is the prefix going from one to the other, a transit, right? That's one way of thinking of it. Transcend. So I, in a way, have to take people's word for it. And science as well. Because the more science studies gender, the more we get a look that we really are expansive beings. I'd like to take a break and take a breath, right? These are pieces of a puzzle that perhaps, like I say, my understanding grew over time. And still I'm learning, there's new words. And I really love that I get to learn through my child and through the people who share with me that these dimensions can feel congruous or incongruous. And when they are incongruous, for example, my son, the way he wanted to dress, the way he wanted to behave, the way he showed up in the world, these were not congruous with the social gender norms for girl. And people would say, oh, he's a tomboy. And I would say, well, maybe. I didn't know. But it didn't feel right. That word didn't feel right either. But we used it, for lack of a better word, right? And the incongruity of this inner feeling and outer can be called gender dysphoria. It's a medical term. It's also an emotional term. And when these three components, body and social and identity, are not feeling aligned, that could be a word a way to describe someone who is transgender. Okay, it's their inner feeling of who they are is not lining up somehow with these other aspects of gender. And it can feel just uncomfortable. For people who it aligns, like for me, I'm born assigned a female, I show up in the world, I look a certain way, and I feel like people see me for who I am, and I don't have feelings of this is not right for me. So I'm in congruence with that sex assigned at birth. So we'll say same gender, cisgender. And then transgender, someone who doesn't feel that aligns. Some non-binary people might use the word transgender. There are many words that are coming at us these days. And I think this is where grandparents can get confused too, because the younger people are always going to bring new words. That's just the way it works in the world. We could even think of times in our lives where I said certain words and my parents, they just couldn't understand what I was talking about or why I was using a certain style of speak. Like when I was a kid, I just did it. When I was a child, the word like, he's like this or like that. And it was a part of the way young people spoke at the time. And even now a little bit, as I picked up on. But my parents didn't understand why I had to insert that word. That's just a very simple way of saying things change. The first three are more familiar. Intersex, are people familiar with that word? Intersex people are not people who always identify as transgender, but they are part of this gender diverse world that we live in. Intersex people are often showing up and labeled one body, but in their other, I'm not saying it right, let me go back. Intersex people often are born with sex characteristics that are either ambiguous or a combination of what we might say male or female, and also might have variation of their secondary sex characteristics on the internal. So someone who might be born with a penis and ovaries, something like this. And again, it can be very many reasons why someone could be intersex. It could have to do with their DNA. Sometimes they also feel transgender, sometimes not. But it is part of our big, expansive vocabulary that is more and more in use. Gender fluid, describing someone who might feel that their gender is changeable. Non-binary, I described before. Someone who's queer, this word has been being used for so long and is a phrase. Excuse me?
Oh, no, I was just going to, I was just thinking about that word because a long time ago that word was very derogatory towards someone. So it's just amazing that it's come back into the new system now as a loving word instead of a horrible word.
A loving word instead of a horrible word. Thank you. Yes, so that is important to note as well, that this community has some of the words that people use, and it's not just in this community, in other places in the world as well, where certain marginalized groups that perhaps words were used harmfully have then chosen to take that word and say, no, we will take that word, and it is our word. In this case, queer is a word that everyone can use, and that it is not a derogatory word unless used as such, right? Also is not meant to be used if someone doesn't want it. So if someone would say to me, you know, that word, even though, yes, I'm gay or I'm transgender, that word doesn't fit for me, I will say, thank you for sharing that, and I will not use that for you. And queer, as I was describing, my son and his fiance use it because it feels very expansive for them, that it can not put them in a box that they don't want to be in, and that they can also find community in that word.
You don't think that puts them in a box anyway? If they say they're queer.
So I would love to get into discussion, but I would like to do my presentation first, sure. and then yes, I would love to have more conversation. No, I acknowledge that I did allow, and I would love to. So please hold that one because it is important. And I'm going to make a mental note of that question, which is, isn't this another way of putting people in boxes? So let's hold that, because I think that's an important thing to honor. So in thinking of those different words, and these words are not limited. That's why I wrote "and more" and had the ellipses, because these words will continue to change. Words that mean something to someone don't mean something to someone else. And even why words like this are used, right? Why? Is it just giving more labels? And why do we need more labels? Right? And I think a part of that is because we've had labels for a very long time. And for people who don't fit into those labels, they can feel very ostracized, very othered, and even been put there. You're not this, you say you're not this or that, then you are not welcome. And so I think people have come up with many, many words because they're having an experience that they would like to describe. I did not invent the word gender spectrum. Gender spectrum evolved because people wanted to understand a concept that we're not just male or female as humans, and that there's actually a whole gender spectrum or a universe or a multiverse that people are experiencing. Because after all, it's human. And we are not just science, and we are not just psychological, and we are not just spiritual. We have all these aspects of ourselves. And today's youth are really pushing the boundaries, and I would say the young people, which includes young adults as well. And then there are people who are middle-aged and elders who are also finding their way to feel that these new words or these new pronouns can be really helpful. They're more accurate. What's a pronoun? What is a pronoun?
A word that stands for a noun.
Word that stands for a noun. Thank you. So that is a really important definition to have. So if my name if I am to be using correct English, someone would not just say my name all the time. They would use my pronoun in place, right? And so knowing that a name can be very important for someone, it's their describer, right? If I say Allison in this context, I know who I'm thinking of, not just a name, but a whole being. And the pronoun that I use is important. Mine, Janna, I didn't even do my intro in the beginning. I jumped right in, but Janna, my pronouns are she, her. And my son, as we said, he's transgender. His pronouns are he, him. Those are what's accurate for him. His partner, who is a non-binary person, their pronouns are they, them. And I think they, them has started to become much more common, and yet we still have a confusion around it. These other pronouns are not as well known, but I put them there because I don't want us to get stuck on just she, he, and they. Because these other pronouns exist as well. Zizir, ze, zem, tite, aye, as opposed to, or inclusive of, if someone's speaking in the Spanish language, would be el, ella, and aye, with an e on the end, as another way of having a gender-neutral pronoun. So if the first two are gender-specific, and then the next are gender-neutral, meaning they don't tell us the gender of someone just by using that pronoun. Some people prefer no pronouns, and in that case it is tricky because we're using their name very commonly. And while it can be clunky, we get used to it. I have some families where that is the case for the younger people. And some use all the pronouns. Someone might say, hi, my name is Janna, and all the pronouns are fine for me. And that can be confusing too, because we would like perhaps to be guided, to be directed. We don't want to get it wrong. But if someone says they use all pronouns, trust. You can use whatever pronoun. Sometimes I specifically use they, them when I speak to someone who invites me to do all pronouns, because I need practice using a they, them pronoun. It's a different pronoun than perhaps I'm used to in my everyday. And one of the main reasons why I strive to use someone's pronouns that they feel are their correct pronouns is I want to respect. I want to use the right name for someone. I want to use the correct pronoun for someone because I know they will feel respected when I do that. And even if I make a mistake, which we'll get into, because I know a lot of us, we want to respect and still we might make a mistake. What do we do? But I love this time we can acknowledge, I know you're all here because you're learners or you wouldn't be here. We can be lifelong learners, yes? And we can take a hard subject and maybe approach it from a few different ways. Hearing personal stories, I think, really helps. That's one of the reasons why our family shares our story. And I think also learning from a book can be really helpful, and studying many different aspects of a topic till we start to understand. And what grandparents sometimes say is, well, I just don't understand. And then the grandchild will say, it's okay, you don't have to understand. I just hope that you can love and respect me. And so then the grandparent will perhaps do their best to make the adjustments. Because it's a book talk, I want to read a couple of thoughts that people have offered over time in these grandparent groups. One grandparent said, I didn't understand why I was so upset when I learned my grandchild was transgender. I thought I was a very accepting person. And I thought, wow, that was a really beautiful reflection that this person had. There was something very personal about it for her. My mother says, to people who are newer on the journey, she says, our family is much further along than you are, and you will see in time that you will get used to all of this, and it won't be hard anymore. Over the years, it will just become who that person is. And she describes her grandson, my child, as gentleman. She says, when you break it down into 2 words, he is a kind, gentle, and loving man. I love him, and if you knew him, you would too. That's sweet. And again, the grandparent love. I would think perhaps we won't understand a lot about our grandchildren's lives, and we also don't know how long we'll have with our grandchildren, and so how can we be that grand love in their lives? How can we make life easy? And there are studies that show that just using a person's correct name and pronouns greatly increases their mental and emotional health. And so knowing that we have that power in us, if we can just use their correct name and pronoun. And so I offer in the book, and also we have a handout today to take with you if you like, some helpful hints for adjusting to pronouns. And this could be not just about a grandchild, it could be about a community member, right? We have adults in our midst who are transgender, who are non-binary, who are perhaps changing pronouns. How can we be of support? And there's many ways. Sometimes, and these are grandparent and parent generated. We have had brainstorming conversations. How have you adjusted? And in some cases, people have written letters or stories about the person using their correct name and their pronoun. They've also done, like on a chalkboard, write out the sentences. I love Amaya. He is a gentleman. And then I'm using his name and his pronoun over and over and over until I get it right. And perhaps practicing when you think of the person, just they come to your mind and you practice in your mind, Shayla, they love their dog. And then I just think of the person and I have the conversation in my mind. Have you heard of swear jars? We could use a pronoun jar. Every time you unfortunately make a mistake with the pronoun, you put it in a jar and then you can donate it to an organization that's doing good works, especially in support of trans people. And there are a lot of great organizations in this city right now, so if you need help with that, let me know. And we're talking about the person fondly, using their correct name and pronouns, practicing with a friend or a partner, and holding each other accountable. This would be when you agree to gently correct each other or remind each other. And you can use your phone, update it in your contacts, put their pronoun and their new name together in your contacts. And you might come up with other ways. The trickiest thing is when we make a mistake, right? Because I think if we are coming from respect, it's really difficult when we know that maybe we have unintentionally caused harm, right? That's perhaps a microaggression. Have you heard of that term? I know you do a lot of anti-racist work here, and just so that word comes up. So microaggression, a seemingly perhaps small interaction, we could say, because it could be verbal, it could be other, where a person is feeling perhaps that their race or their religion or their ethnicity or their socioeconomic or there's many ways to have a microaggression come, that it's something perhaps that maybe is highlighting a stereotype or something that is harmful. Again, doesn't have to be a very big thing, could be very small, but very small, like mosquito bite, that if we get a lot of mosquito bites all in one place, it gets really itchy, right? So same with a microaggression. If we would make a mistake one time, a person you're meeting, oh, hello, and maybe you made a mistake, you would just simply correct yourself. Oh, I meant, so if I would say to Amaya, Amaya doesn't get that very often. Shayla does, though. So if I would say to Shayla, oh, Shayla, I meant they went to the store, and then I would just quickly move on. Maybe not even over-apologize. Because what happens when we over-apologize to someone?
Make it worse.
It can make it worse, or
Exactly.
call more attention to it, or even have them then have to like take care of our feelings around it when really it was about them. And maybe we each could think of a time in our life. For me, it's even my name. My name's Janna, but sometimes people will see it and call me Janna or Wanna. It doesn't bother me if you do it the first few times I've met you, but if I would say, hey, my name's Janna, and then it would repeat, it would make me wonder if that person really cared about me. Right? And so I still have the privilege of being cisgender. I don't get a lot of discrimination based on that part of my gender. So I think just knowing that you can quickly move on is okay. Now, if it's happening regularly and you're realizing, sometimes this will happen. Grandma, you used the wrong pronoun. No, I didn't. And she might not have even realized that she did. And so then there's another back and forth on it. So it's important for us to be self-studying, realize if we're messing up regularly, and then go back to the practice, right? And then keep practicing in whatever way makes sense for us. Some people, it's a kinesthetic way of learning, so we can walk and talk the pronoun, right? Or there's mind games we can use. There's a lot of ways. Even, have you ever tried writing with your non-dominant hand? That's a great way to change our brains. Write with your non-dominant hand. It won't look really legible, but it will help your brain to adjust. And remember to practice to help understand in your own mind and heart how it might be to make that adjustment. Grandparents will say, I had to make changes too, or parents, or anyone in the family. I did go through something. Parents or grandparents might call it a transition. I think that works, and yet we don't want to take that word away from the trans community, but it is a change. It is going from one place to the other. My mother-in-law would say, in the book, actually, and he's always been my son, she wrote a lot about this, how she had to adjust. My granddaughter is now my grandson. I had to adjust the words I use. They're not my daughters. I have a son and a daughter. They're not the girls, right? All these words that were fond, we had to find new fond words. And if someone is non-binary, they may not like the word sister or brother. We could use the word sibling. And the roles that people have then might shift too. My husband, this is very gender traditional, but I had done the talk with my daughters, right, about puberty and what their bodies might go through and what it might be to be in relationships with people. And my husband didn't really do that talk with the kids until we said, maybe man to man, you should have the talk. And it was awkward for him, but he did it, right? He found a way to have a conversation about being a man in this world and what might be expected of you and what might you want to respond with in this world. Going through these changes, this is a story from the book. This book is chock full of quotes from grandparents, stories and interviews with grandparents of trans people, and also stories by trans people themselves about their grandparents. So this is by Eli. He's a trans guy. I knew him when he was a very little kid, and we got to meet each other again in his adult life. He says, I'm my grandpa's Einikel. Einikel is a Yiddish word. Due to generational differences, Eli writes, it sometimes can be particularly hard for grandparents to understand their grandchild's experience with gender. I was lucky enough to have grandparents who made an active effort to understand what I was experiencing by asking me questions and even attending an LGBTQ family support group. The approach they took was that although they might never be able to understand why I transitioned, they would support me regardless. Every supportive person in a trans person's life, especially for trans youth, makes a big difference. Respecting a person's preferred name and pronouns is a great place to start. He says, when I came out to my grandparents and started transitioning, my grandpa taught me a Yiddish word, einikel, which means grandchild and has no associated gender. Sharing this with me showed me that he sees me for who I am and that regardless of my gender, he will always love me foremost as his grandchild. This sums up one of the most important things that a trans kid needs to hear. Your value to me is not contingent upon your gender identity. And I put one story directly after by Jackie C., a grandma. She writes the story, The Same One I'd Loved. And she says, this child was the same one I'd loved from the moment he took his first breath, and that love would never change. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to start her essay. She ends it that way as well. It's not always easy to move from a place of confusion, worry, grief, to celebration, acceptance. I, in my heart, believe that part of what keeps us from getting there are the old stories. Stories that we've been taught that may have meaning for us, partially because they were the stories always told. And perhaps this is a way to think of a new story being told through the love. These challenges, perhaps other challenges, perhaps feelings of loss, perhaps feelings of being tradition. So many possible ways to kind of block ourselves from seeing what is. Jordan is another friend of mine. He is a speaker. It would be wonderful to have him here too. He's a wonderful speaker. Perhaps sometime we could come together. He is a speaker. He loves to speak in churches particularly, and to bridge the understanding from a spirit place. Because we know that when we come from respect, we're not meaning to hurt someone, and still it can hurt. And this happened in Jordan's life. I loved him to tell the story, and I won't read the whole story, but he says his intention is always to move from love and grace with his family around his transition from female to male. And so here they were back in 2017, and someone in the family had passed away, and he had been his authentic self living as a man for 5 or 6 years now. And when everyone was there, he says that everyone was preparing the meal, and when his grandparents arrived, one of the nieces greeted the grandparents at the door, and the grandmother did greet Jordan and use the wrong pronoun when she saw him. And all the grandkids were very surprised and looked at him like, uh-oh, what are we going to do here? And so basically he stayed in the room, and the grandkids were using the correct pronouns, which is another way to help correct. Simply use the correct pronoun and hope that the other person picks up on it. But Grandma wasn't picking up on it. So Jordan went out of the room, and Grandma came and sat with Jordan. And in his most loving way, as he said, he tried to hold his grandma in his heart when he gave her this feedback. She said, "Oh, I've noticed you're pulling away from me, honey." And he said, "Well, Nanny, you used the wrong pronouns for me in the kitchen." And she said, "No, I didn't." And he said, "Yeah, you did." And when all the kids turned around and looked at me because they were afraid to correct you, you didn't notice. And Nanny said, I'm sorry, honey, it's only been 5 years, so give me a break. And he said, well, or she said, it's only been 3 years. And he said, Noel, it's been 6. And I know you love me, Granny, but that kind of love hurts. And he didn't want to hurt her either, he didn't. But it became too difficult for him to keep being in the space as she was doing that. And he goes on to tell a beautiful story of time and love, to the point where right before she died, she did really start using his name and pronouns in the way that made most sense for him. And it was so poignant for him to have that experience. So I always tell families that I know that people can adjust over time, and that sometimes we do have to give people, quote, a little break. But that doesn't mean we just let people be off the hook or we allow them to still be hurtful. It's just that, yes, we can understand brains that don't learn as quickly, patterns that have been set for a very long time. We can give empathy and understanding and space for that, but not over the empathy and understanding of the person themselves, knowing that for Jordan, it was very, very hurtful, and he didn't want to have that between him and his grandma. So how can she move toward him as he moved towards her? And that's why I just love the work that I do with grandparents. This is from another beautiful grandma, and her story is they were waiting. And I also, I work closely with one of her grandkids. They come and they do talks as well. And I remember hearing this story from them too. So MB writes, when I learned my grandchild children, she has 2 transgender grandchildren, identified as transgender, I loved them as much as ever, but I lost my way in knowing how to accommodate this change. Each time I visited, I arrived at their home with a plan of questions to ask or something relevant to tell them. For example, I looked for positive stories about transgender people or positive trends in legislation. Well, many months passed before I realized this is not what they most wanted. They wanted their grandma just to hang out with them, to relax, to be her natural goofy self, and to listen deeply to whatever they wanted to share. I slowly returned to the spirit of play and attentiveness and ease in our connection. They were waiting. Yeah. Sometimes one grandma or one grandparent in a couple can be much further along than the other, and that's okay too. They can also help the grandchildren to feel loved and supported, even as the other grandparent might be still learning, still growing. These are some words that have come through from therapists, from trans people, and they're helpful hints for us all to hold in thinking about how to communicate. If we want to really let someone in our lives know how much we love them, I love that first one. Everything I learn about you makes me love you more. Because so many times I hear, well, I just don't know how to open up these conversations with my grandchild or with this family member or with a close friend. And we might just say to them, you know, I'd love to know more about you. Everything I learn about you just makes me love you more. That might make them want to open up to us. And also, it's not their responsibility to carry the weight of our fears, parents, grandparents. So even if we are afraid, we're worried, don't bring that to the challenge. Sometimes people say, well, why would someone want to do that right now? Because, well, now you're going to be discriminated against. Truth is, whether they announce it to us or not, they are already being harmed and discriminated against. And the reason why they're telling us is not to push it in our face, but instead to invite us in. Do you hear the difference between coming out and inviting in? It's really powerful. So if we can think of when people do come out to us or tell us about this very important part of themselves, it's about inviting us in. And may we be so lucky to be invited into grandchildren's lives in this way, or someone in our community, in our families. And may we not be their first bullies. may we not be the one who are correcting them because they're behaving in a certain way that maybe would be perceived negatively because of norms and stereotypes that can sometimes be harmful, right? And this is part of our active allyship, which I know as this church is very active as being allies, in that we must not just give ourselves the word ally, but how do we ally? Ally is a verb, just like love is a verb, right? How do we ally? How do we hold ourselves accountable? I didn't check this number, 530. I think it's higher today, that the ACLU is tracking anti-LGBTQ bills in this nation. And of course, we've had very harmful executive orders handed out. So it's important to us, regardless of our own political affiliations, that we take our allyship to heart. What would an ally do in this situation? There are so many attacks, including school sports bans, forced outings, which California has made. It is illegal to out a child to their family. School facilities bans, you can't use this bathroom, you use that bathroom, healthcare bans. And as we know, access to healthcare is fundamental. It's very difficult to thrive in a world if we cannot have access to healthcare. Yes, including gender affirming care, but it is that trans people can't always access any health care, dental care. It's not about being trans or not. They just can't access it because of the barriers and harmful stereotypes. So these labels are not meant to be putting people in boxes, but rather be ways of people to find common community and to find ways to describe themselves in a world that wants to put people in very limited boxes. So it's not a lifestyle choice. It is a choice to outwardly live as one authentic self, but it's not a choice. I wake up and one day I decide I'm transgender. Just like I wake up and I say I'm cisgender, it's not a choice. It's something wired into me, and yes, interplays with culture norms. In one culture, this is normal. In another culture, a different thing is normal. And really at the crux of all my work is my heart, that is a heart belief that every child deserves to be loved and supported unconditionally. And if I don't understand, may I find the answers to that in community with others that are learning and growing and being lifelong learners. So this is a wonderful place to pause, to reflect together, to share stories, to get questions out there. So I'd love to do that together. And thank you so much for being here. So if you do have questions, we can hand them to Allison on the cards. And
anybody else want a card to make a question?
Oh, this is a really great question. So this one is about gender affirming care and specific medical care, such as hormone blockers and surgery. And so the question is, what would we say to someone who says that they're pro-trans, meaning, oh, of course there's trans people in the world, and absolutely, and then yet wants to say that the medical care should wait till a person's 21. And again, this is like a whole lecture in and of itself, really, and is a nuanced conversation. However, if we can think about, if a person has a heart difference in their heart, like a physical heart, and there's a new surgery that could relieve them of this heart problem, who should make the decision?
Patient and their family.
Patient, family, and there's one more, the doctor themselves, right? The expert, the professional expert. So somehow, this debate about when trans people should get to receive life-affirming, medically necessary care. Who decides it's medically necessary? Do I?
Three.
Is that? The same three.
Should.
Not me, unless it's my body. So what I say to people is that I firmly believe that there's a preponderance of evidence right now, and if you look at the American Academy of Pediatrics, they will say that absolutely people should be given the medically appropriate care that they need at a time that's appropriate for them. And that to wait till 21 actually can cause harm. Now, some people have no medical care. Does that make them less transgender? No, because it's not the surgeries one has that makes them transgender. It's not the medical care. It is the fact that a person exists as that. The mind, body, heart, psychosocial, emotional being of a person. That, or biological psychosocial, not a random time. So these are some of the things I would say that I'm a science-based, I'm a social speaker, but I speak from science, and the science is showing us that the longer a person lives with the depression, the anxiety, the complete incongruence, the longer they suffer, the harder it is to resolve that, even if they take steps to transition, or even when. So what we see right now, and what's beautiful, is that studies have been done because we started using example hormone blockers over 15 years ago, and those people are in long-term studies right now, and what we're seeing is that a very, very, very less than 1% of people have any regret, period. And how about knee surgery? Do you know that there's a higher regret for having knee surgery than for any trans surgery? So these are just really important facts, and I'm not a doctor, so I really can't be the one to discuss so much medical, but these are things that I've learned, that I've gleaned from trusted sources, and I believe that's really important to go to those trusted sources. UCSF, UCLA, Boston Children's, I mean, we can go on. They are all saying the same. Yeah.
You don't think that it's important to wait after the puberty?
The challenge that has come up for that is once a trans person has gone through puberty, there are certain things that they absolutely can't change about themselves. And what we've learned from anecdotal evidence from trans people is that they would have really liked to have that option of not going through the wrong puberty. Not everybody has that option. The average age of knowing is said to be around 7.5 years old, but the average age of disclosure is still around 15. So in that time, a person is not necessarily able to even get the care that would give them the chance to go through, for them, the right puberty. Now, what I will say is that in this world we have many, many options and possibilities, and from trans people teaching us, they are saying, yeah, I really sure would have liked to have that option, so that as a trans woman, perhaps I wouldn't have grown an Adam's apple, or as a trans man, my hips wouldn't have expanded to a point that gives me gender dysphoria, or breasts that then have to be removed. It is true that we are still making strides in the medical care, and that there are still differences of ideas and different access depending on where you live, the community in which you're in, the family beliefs. Hormone care was very new when my son was young, and he had an early puberty, which is another interesting part of trans people's lives. It's just, there's so many things to kind of go, like, you ever see a curriculum web? You have a certain topic in the middle, and then you start making a web, and then from that circle you have more tendrils. That's what happens. As soon as we start thinking about this, we're going to have more questions, and I hope to answer some of them in the 2 books, but another wonderful book, and on my website I have a list of books. She, He, They is a new book by Skylar Baylor, and he's an amazing teacher. He's a trans man. He was one of the first athletes to be able to transition in college and still play the sport that he had a scholarship for. And instead of being on the women's swim team, he moved to the men's swim team, and all that worked for him. So he has a lot to say about being trans in the world, but also being an athlete, and it's a really great book, She, He, They. It's a really good one. I don't have more cards, but do other people want to? Yeah.
I just had a comment.
Yes, a comment, Tammy.
I realized I was always queer, but in the 50s, as far as I was aware in Seattle, there was a simple other synonym for that, odd. Or the other term would have been, you're not from around here, are you?
Uh-huh. And like you said, and like you said at the very beginning, these words have shifted. Queer meant odd, and that was okay too, unless it was used in a not nice way, right? In a way that's bullying or teasing. These words can then be hurtful. And perhaps in the 70s, during punk culture, is also when the word queer started being used by politically active LGBTQ plus. We've added many letters that weren't even part of it at that time, but yet the people existed. It's the words. And that kind of goes to what your question was before. Why so many labels? Why does someone need this label? Why? What do we think?
I mean, we label everything now.
We do label a lot of things.
And I think it's, in fact, I'm sorry, but I think it can be a problem also to label everything.
Mm-hmm.
To label, you label it's a child when he's 5 already. It's just, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I think it could be, we can question that. We can open the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have spent your whole life looking for identity, who you are, who you belong to, where your community is, these words give us a way also of helping find other people that identify with life the same way that we do.
Which I think can be perhaps a little different when we're talking about perhaps someone who has had this life experience, or perhaps giving a label. So I never gave my son the label transgender. He took it for himself. And so I only call him transgender because he said, I said, does that word work for you? He said, for lack of a better word. And yet he knows that he is by definition of the word transgender. Yeah, so I would not give that word to a person unless they took it, but I might teach it to them as a word, which I do wish I had more understanding of that word when my child was little, because I would have shown him books and said, wow, look at this, how this is so interesting that a person can feel this way. And then I would open up conversation. So I think words and labels can also be conversation openers, but I would never give it to a person. So parents, I would say the one way I've seen parents be very gender expansive right now is that they're not always using she or he for their child. But let's remember, they, going back to that one, doesn't mean a person is anything identity-wise. It only means that the pronoun that they appreciate is a non-gendered pronoun. That's all we know about them when they use that pronoun. I know some women in their writing now that are using non-gendered pronouns. Why would they want to do that?
So people would listen to what a woman might say.
Because we all have stereotypes that go with our labels, right? And so I say only have a label if the label works for that person. It can be tricky, and also I think those of us who, there's also, I think this is an important part that I didn't mention, cultural differences, right? Because there are some languages that use no pronouns, and so when they come and they hear how important it is for us to have the right pronoun, they start getting really confused because in their culture, the pronoun is like not a part. And so cultural differences. Is this resonating a bit? Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Some language, you don't
Yeah.
have that at all.
Yeah.
In Polish, for example, the problem is at the end of the world that you need to change all your world. Or, I mean, it's very complicated.
It gets complicated. I agree.
Actually, it's words is the problem, and we need George Carlin here to do that. And
Words are the problem.
Number one, I'm thinking is, I'm a kid on TV, what's going on? Discrimination is a terrible word, and yet you want to be taught to be discriminating.
Very good. And that's, I love that too. I love taking words and musing on them because we want to be discriminating in that we want to be judicious or discerning, right? And yet we don't want to use it to other someone, which I think is where the discrimination word, right, becomes, is that it's an othering, it is a harm. And knowing that people are really struggling right now, that even when we don't understand, and I love these conversations because we get to have the confusion, and we're going to leave and we're still going to be confused.
Oh, for sure.
I often go home like, I don't think I really talked about that clearly. I wish that I had more words, and yet I have the words. And I only have the words that have been given to me. And that's why I love to highlight other people's stories in my book and not just tell you about my own. The first book is really about my experiences raising my son and what I learned along the way. And then this book is trying to be inclusive of many voices. There's a story, it was an interview with the grandma, and she talks about the difference she has with her husband. They are different politically, and so they have different politically charged ideas about this, and yet they love their grandchild, and so they have had to figure out how to do that because they don't want to hurt their grandchild, right? And so they have conversations together about that. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, I'm half Filipino, and so when I was growing up, my mom did not gender us at all. She was like, save your money, get an education, that's it. And so the first time I was gendered by someone else, I was 27. Somebody called me a woman. I was like, ugh, what are you talking about? Because I had grown up thinking in my head, I'm just Jess. Like I have no identity associated with that, because I was like, whatever the dudes will do, I'll do. Whatever the girls will do, I'll do too.
So you're saying, if I understand, that in your culture, well, in your family you were raised, but is it true also in your culture that there's not gender roles, or are there? And it's my ignorance.
I think it tends to be more matriarchal, but it's funny because we don't have, or in Tagalog, you label like a sibling and then you say woman or man afterwards. So it's a descriptor. There's no brother or sister. It's sibling of woman, sibling of. And if you ever heard any Filipino customer service people, they'll say ma'am, sir, which is a hybrid because they don't have ma'am or sir. They just combine it. So if you ever hear
different
ma'am, sir,
different culture, different approach.
Yes.
So,
and yet,
really, yeah.
It's why we don't
there are trans people in every culture.
Absolutely.
I'm forgetting the word in Filipino culture, but there is in Tagalog, there is a term, and I'm forgetting it. There's all over the world, and also different ways that they've been treated, both traditionally and then also in modern day. And sometimes those are at odds, right? Example, the Hijira people, women in India, assigned male at birth, they were given very revered positions, and so they were the midwives, the magic women, and the carers, but yet they couldn't have their own. And now they're fighting to be mothers, to be able to have their own in this modern day, right? So they don't want to necessarily be siloed into the honored, but yet specifically othered as well in modern day. And I think I had this grandma that used to lean in like this at every Zoom. She was like this. And now she does this. And then every time I see her hand go up almost toward the end, and that's when she drops her wisdom. And she says, I just have decided to choose joy. And I love that. Thank you, dear Myra, for giving me that. She's 90 plus, and she said, I realized that I could struggle. She had to go to therapy. She came to our support group. She was so emotionally distraught, both inside and also about the way the world would treat her grandchild, coming from a Jewish family. I have a grandma who struggles so because her whole family was wiped out in the Holocaust as a Jewish family. And now she's also reflecting, and also LGBTQ people were part of that. And many other pieces of that culture. And so for her, the grief is around, first of all, now her grandchild's having intersectionality of a few layers where they are othered, and also that perhaps her family line will not be continued by this grandchild. But then she realized that could be true of any grandchild. Doesn't mean that they're trans or, not every person is going to have children and continue their family line, right? So going back to the choosing joy, how can we move toward our family, our community members, and be that grand love? So thank you so much, everyone. You are a wonderful audience. I feel like this audience could really have some really wonderful.
You can get books.
Yes.
Will you sign some books, Janna?
Yes, I would love to sign it if you would like to purchase. And I think we have some here. Don't we have Grand Love here as well?
Yes.
We have, I have a copy from you, but
Oh, yes.
we have two of those books in the library.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
let's make sure that we get a Grand Love here too. There we go. And if people want these slides, I'd be happy to send a PDF that we could share, because I saw some people taking photos. So let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Marcy. Hi.